What a disaster. This dude must be a glutton for punishment. He must enjoy public humiliation because every time he speaks into a microphone, Tim Walz reminds the people who regret voting for Donald Trump that it could be much, much worse. No wonder Stephen A. Smith is thinking about running for president. Stevie doesn't know a damn thing about politics, but he couldn't be worse than these other dorks that the Democrats are presenting. I know it's early. I know we're still 3 years away, but just think about who the Democrats are presenting as their new fearless leader. Gabby Newsom, the Prime Minister of the People's Republic of California. Under Gabby's leadership, the population of California has declined while the population of Mexico has seen a dramatic increase. My inside sources are telling me that Californians are paying smugglers to sneak them into Mexico. Normally, I think it's the other way around, but that's okay. It's not all bad news for the People's Republic. There's one area where the population is actually increasing. The women's bathroom. With Chad Thundercock being allowed to use the women's restroom, the population has increased by 50%. Democrats are also considering a presidential ticket of Bernard Sanders and AOC LGBT. Perhaps their Secretary of State will be ++, with their Secretary of Defense being @. Of course, they will have to keep the @ away from Hillary Clinton. As you guys know, Hill gets herself into trouble with those emails. Even though these potential candidates are less than ideal, at least they were selected. At least deacons at Woke United Methodist are encouraging them to lead. I have yet to see someone, anyone, clamoring for Captain Doofus Tim Walz to run for president. Yet for some reason, Timmy continues to go on this cross-country tour, speaking in front of crowds who are probably paid to be there, where he proves how incompetent and unqualified he is. Tim Walz isn't qualified to lead the Girl Scouts. Well, Casey, don't you mean the Boy Scouts? Have you been to Minnesota lately? Hell, in Minnesota, I think they're called the non-binary Scouts. All genders are accepted, and even those who have yet to decide on their proper gender identification are included. Earlier this week, Tim Walz was speaking at the recently defunded Harvard, which, by the way, I know the Trumper is taking a beating right now. I know things aren't great. I know we're going through the pains of transitioning from disaster to potential prosperity. But isn't it great that we are no longer talking about the police being defunded? We are now talking about woke colleges and universities being defunded because they refuse to quit pretending that men can be women. But anyway, Timmy was speaking at Harvard this week, and he was talking about the election. He wasn't talking about the midterms next November. He wasn't talking about the 2028 election. Captain Doofus was talking about the election that ended 6 months ago. For some reason, Timmy just can't let it go. Maybe he misses the spotlight. Maybe he has this unquenchable desire to showcase his incompetence. While talking about the huge embarrassing failure known as the Harris-Walz ticket, Tim tried to entertain the paid audience with a fascinating story about Cam Harris selecting him to be pretend vice president. You could hear the collective groan in the audience as Timmy began to tell the story. Most of us already know the reason that cackling Cam selected Tim. She knew there was absolutely no way he would overshadow her because he's less likable than she is. But according to Tim Walz, his ability to repulse people was not the reason that he was selected. According to Timmy, Cam chose him to join her as the replacement loser for Johnny B. Biden because Tim has this unique ability to speak to white people. Make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Link to the second channel is in the description below. Today on the second channel, going to be talking about the ongoing demise of the UFL. Last weekend was absolutely brutal for the UFL, which is the football equivalent to the WNBA dump. The league is on life support, and the janitor is about to pull the plug so he can plug in his vacuum. So, if you haven't already, click the link in the description below, subscribe to the second channel. Tim Walz continues touring the country, begging for acceptance and validation. Now, to his credit, he had enough self-awareness to make some adjustments to his plan. Since everyone over the age of 25 thinks Tim Walz isn't qualified to pump gas, hell, he might not even be qualified to pass it. But since everyone over the age of 25 knows Tim Walz is the face of failure, he has decided to adjust his strategy in a desperate attempt to appeal to a younger demographic. This dude who looks like a librarian is trying to appeal to the cool kids. Timmy decided to speak to college kids, hoping he could convince them that he is qualified to be president. When you think about it, it's not a bad strategy. Students attending Woke U, they have spent the last 4 years being brainwashed. Their young minds are primed for indoctrination, so it shouldn't take a magician to convince them that Tim Walz is competent. Hell, he should have no problem convincing them as a librarian. Timmy is speaking to future woke welfare collectors. The event is being moderated by a lovely lady named Brittany Shepard, who I believe works at LGBT News. Timmy is explaining why Cackle and Cam picked him to be part of their dynamic duo of failure, and he started boasting about his ability to relate to toxic masculinity of the Caucasian persuasion. Watch for yourself.
Look, my job was to do it. Look, I knew I was on the ticket, I would argue, because we did a lot of amazing progressive things in Minnesota that improved people's lives. But I also was on the ticket, quite honestly, because I could code talk to white guys watching football, fixing their truck, doing that I could put them at ease. I was the permission structure to say, look, you can do this and vote for this. I understand myself. I said, I think I'll give you pretty good stuff, but I'll also give you 10% problematic.
What? Excuse me? Let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. You were selected to be the secondary loser to the original replacement loser because you have the ability to speak to white dudes? Cam Harris represents masculinity better than Tim Walz. Bob Greiner is more masculine than Tim Walz. What the hell's he talking about? What white men was he putting at ease? The only men I can think of that related to Tim Walz was the men aspiring to be women. They love Timmy. Throughout his tenure as governor of Minnesota, Tim has made the women's restroom all-inclusive. Hell, he's even made the men's restroom all-inclusive by installing Tampax machines. If there is a line for the women's restroom, don't you worry, men pretending to be ladies. There's plenty of tampons available in the men's room. Several minutes later, Tim Walz tried to relate to white men by complaining about white men. He was talking about the lack of diversity in the Trump administration. We have seen what their DEI looks like. It's a bunch of incompetent white men, and they are destroying our great country. They are trampling on our rainbow flag. Tim Walz is accusing someone else of being incompetent? Also, I thought the diversity police would be celebrating the Trump administration. Check out some of these white men that the Trumper selected for his cabinet. Tulsi Gabbard, Marco Rubio, Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, Vivek Ramaswamy. I have never seen that much white in the White House. According to Tim Walz, Minnesota is a shining example of how diversity can elevate a state. He claimed that 70% of the workforce in Minnesota will consist of people that come from communities of color, or as Tim prefers to call them behind the scenes, marginalized groups. 70%. 70% of the jobs in Minnesota will be filled by people of color. You know, this was the perfect opportunity for the reporter from LGBT News to ask a follow-up question. Of course, she didn't do that because she's probably only allowed to ask questions that Tim Walz has already been given the answers to. But Uncle Casey is wondering, how are 70% of the jobs in Minnesota going to be filled by people of color when 77% of the population consist of white people? How is 23% of the population going to fill 70% of the jobs? If Tim somehow finds a way to do this, he's going to set record highs for unemployment. Another follow-up question should have been, why are you continuing to waste your time? Why is Tim Walz wasting his time touring the country? Why is he wasting money begging people to take him seriously? I have a better chance of lightning striking directly into my ass than Tim Walz has of becoming president. You're more likely to see a minnow swallow Shamu. His incompetence is not the reason that he doesn't have a chance. It's his complete lack of charisma and relatability. Charisma can help you overcome just about anything, but in order to do that, you gotta have it. Tim Walz doesn't. This dude is the definition of trying too hard. Tim Walz is desperate to be cool. He is desperate to be accepted. And the harder he tries, the worse he looks. But give me your thoughts on this. Tim Walz claims that he was selected by cackling Cam Harris because he could relate to white dudes. I'm assuming that the Democratic Party is funding this tour of failure. I can't imagine that Tim Walz is paying these expenses himself. If that's the case, what the hell are they doing? Why are they wasting money on this doofus? You tell me. Sound off in the comments below. I'll see you guys later.